Bandwidth for changelog is provided by Fastly. Learn more at fastly.com, and we're hosted on Linode servers. Head to linode.com/changelog. This episode of JS Party is brought to you by Hired. Hired matches outstanding people with the world's most innovative companies. At Hired, your dream job is waiting to apply to you. Instead of endlessly applying to companies hoping for the best, Hired puts you in control of when and how you connect with interesting opportunities. The best part is Hired is completely free to you. It won't cost you anything. In fact, they pay you to get hired. Head to hired.com/JSParty. Don't Google it. This URL is the only way to double the hiring bonus to $600. Once again, hired.com/JSParty. And now onto the show. Welcome to JS Party, a weekly celebration of JavaScript and the web. Tune in live on Fridays at 3 p.m. US Eastern at changelog.com/live. Join the community and Slack with us in real time. Head to changelog.com/community. Follow us on Twitter. We're at JSPartyFM. And now on to the show.
Welcome to JS Party, where it's a party every week with JavaScript. I'm Mikeal Rogers.
I'm Alex Sexton.
And our guest today is Paul Frazee. Say hi, Paul.
Hey, everybody.
Awesome. So we've got Paul on to talk about the Beaker Browser, which we'll get into a bit later. But first, we're just going to discuss this new Node.js user survey. Everybody heard about Node.js? Everybody know what that's about?
I believe it's pronounced Node.js.
Yes, Node.js. There actually is somebody very prominent who always says it that way, and it just takes too long to say. I don't know. I think that we can just call it Node. Anyway, so there was this great Node.js user survey. About 1,400 people were surveyed at the end of 2016. And it took quite a while. Like, I was still at the foundation while this was happening, obviously. So it took a while to synthesize the results. But now finally, like, all of the results and some big kind of summaries and all the data are out there. And it's been getting a lot of traction. A lot of people are talking about it. Any initial kind of thoughts or remarks about this from y'all?
Kind of interesting. 50% of people are using containers. That's a nice little insight there.
Well, yeah, I mean, so I always forget, like, not everybody has listened to every podcast where we've talked about a survey. But there's a really good issue of the changelog, actually, where me and Nadia came on and interviewed somebody about the GitHub survey. But one of the things that we got into is, like, it's very important to quantify. You're never going to get 100% of the people, and you're not even going to get like a perfect distribution of people. So it's important to just quantify which section of the community that you got in the survey, right? And so what you tend to do, one really good thing in Node is, like, because you know that the community is doubling every year, if you ask people how long they've been doing Node, you get a really good idea of, like, you know, what the distribution is of the people that you ended up surveying, right? So with stuff like this, you tend to get, you know, people that have been using the language like 2 years or more, right? So that's, you know, this like a longer term, slightly more engaged 25 percentile of the community. And of that section of the community, half of them are using containers, which I think is not that surprising, but I guess kind of surprising. Yeah.
Would you think it should be more or less?
Well, I think it's surprising just in that there's a lot of people using Node.js and just doing front end stuff, and a bunch of them showed up in this. And so, like, yeah, I mean, like, a big portion of the 50% that said no to containers just aren't doing any backend stuff.
Right.
And how many of them are, like, just deploying with now and they don't even know that that's in a container, right? Like, there's already a lot of services that are, like, you know, the containers are so, like they're so hidden from you and so, like, pushed down in the stack that you don't even know. So, yeah, so that was a bit surprising. That's pretty huge, all things considered. Yeah. I'm glad that the foundation is talking about China a bit more. I try to talk about this, but China is, like, the fastest growing section of Node.js users and probably just developers in the world, to be honest. But yeah, it's crazy. There are a lot of users in China. There's, like, I think over 1 million Node.js users in China now. Which is, like, something like 12% of the entire community. So picked up a bunch of them with the survey. So that was cool.
I feel like we have a link that we'll probably share on the page if you're reading the summary or something. It's the Hacker Noon kind of roll up of some of the things. And I feel like they asked some questions about, or rather they have like 39% of respondents are using containers for front-end development. And then they have some things like, are you using Node? Where is this? Got to zoom in. For primary development focus, full stack versus front end and stuff like that. I feel like the number I want is how many people only use Node during your build step versus as a server. And I think that number would be extremely interesting. And I don't think I see that here.
Well, so you could figure it out from the data though. Because they shared the data. So like, you in this one where so there's a graphic here that basically says like, what is your focus? And there's backend, full stack, front end, DevOps, desktop applications, mobile IoT, and security.
Right,
and,
but that's their job. They might program Python and then use Node for So these are all just checkboxes, right? And like what you really want to know is like how many people checked the front end box and not the full stack or back end box, right? Like that, like how many people just only checked the front end box? Like, no,
that's
I don't even like.
Know, right?
I'm a full stack developer, but I don't write Node servers at my job, like I do for fun or whatever. But like at my job, Stripe is a Ruby stack for the most part, right? So I mostly write Ruby if I'm writing backend. So I would consider myself a full stack developer. But
so the way
my day to day is writing JavaScript that either runs in Node as a build step or JavaScript that runs in the browser.
Well, it looks like this question was posed in the context of using Node.js, not in the context of like what kind of developer are you?
I would be interested in the exact wording.
Yeah, it was, well, so I believe the wording was, how is your organization using Node.js? Like, what is the focus of your Node.js usage specifically?
Okay.
Yeah. Which is like, full stack is just such a weird one because it's like, if you click backend and front end, is that not just full stack? Like,
yeah.
Yeah, but it's interesting that like the full stack metric here actually outpaces the front end metric. Like,
what would you think it means to say that I use Node.js for my front end?
Yeah, I mean, so I like that the desktop application, mobile and IoT stuff was on here too, because it really makes front end really mean like JavaScript web front end, right? Like if your front end is an Electron app, you're gonna click the desktop application box. So that's great.
Yeah, Mikeal, do you like? I imagine. I know you used to have numbers on like downloads, but it's still like it feels like based on what gets downloaded from npm, that like over 50% of all use of npm is for building front end tooling, right?
Well, so the metrics on downloads from npm are a little bit harder to contextualize than you would think. So what you kind of have to do is that you've got to look at how much these things are dependent on, and basically try to filter out what you would expect the number of just things being pulled in as a dep is, from like what you might call like a edge dependency, like something that somebody directly pulls in and uses,
Leaf,
right? Like Express is like an edge dependency. Like people don't like add it as a dep in a module that they push up very often, right? And when they do that module is probably like a full application. So like Express is a very good like indicator of, like how many downloads are happening for this particular web thing. I think like Yarn is an edge dependency that is probably like a pretty good, like an accurate interpretation of people that are probably doing some front end stuff that are touching one of those. But like Babel gets pulled in by other tool chains. Webpack gets pulled in by other tool chains. And when you look at their download metrics, they can be pretty astronomical because they're sitting below the stack in so many different applications. So yeah, it's a little bit harder to quantify kind of what's going on there. Also, the front end dep chains appear to be longer. The dep graphs appear to be longer than back end. So that means that their download metrics are going to be like dramatically larger, just on average. like, I mean, a good example of this is like request is dependent on quite a bit, and it's dependent on directly quite a bit, but there are small dependencies of request because it's broken into a bunch of modules, and those modules are depended on by almost nobody but request, and they have astronomical download numbers. Right?
If you look up the like top 10 libraries, JavaScript libraries that are distributed across the Alexa top 1 million, Nope is like number 12 or 8 or something like that. It's extremely high up there, and like virtually no one put it on their page, but Modernizer put it into Modernizer, and now it's one of the top scripts ever distributed on the internet. But I just leave that other part out whenever I tell people that I wrote it.
Exactly. That's why I think like if when you're trying to quantify people, download metrics are a really problematic metric to look at.
Didn't you give like several years of talks about download metrics?
No, I gave several years of talks about growth of package ecosystems and growth of users, and the users are quantified not by the download metrics.
There's the spin every week. The spin.
No. Like I actually, so when the foundation put out the 8 million number, like of users, I was like kind of on my way out of the foundation, and people really went after it and were very skeptical of it. And like, I'm really confident in that number. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is that like it's a very good number from NPM that gives you a very good indication of actual users, because it's basically like npmjs.org website impressions, unique users that have engaged over a particular amount. So over like I think like a 3-month span. So it's a very good indication of like how many people are like on the like, you know, engaging with the NPM website. You can definitely use NPM without using the website, but chances are in a 3-month period, you're going to engage with it if you're a user, unless you're in China. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. But before we get into that, we also have metrics on the Node.js.org website. And because it's localized in so many different languages, it gives you a very good indication of the geographic distribution of Node users. Doesn't give you a great indication of how many users, because you can just use Node.js and never ever touch the Node.js website. Like there's not really a reason to go there. But it gives you a great distribution. So from
FS
that,
docs are on there.
Well, so we did not have metrics on the API documentation until about a month ago. Yeah. So this is the website minus the API docs, because they're often like in their own section. But anyway, so because you have that 12%, because you know that the market share is about 12%, and you know that market share is basically missing from the 8 million number, you can go like, oh, okay, well, do we know how many independent users are in China? Turns out that we do, because virtually every Node.js user in China is a part of this forum called cnodejs.org, which is basically like a forum where people are speaking in Chinese, and like they're supporting each other. They're answering different tech questions, and a lot of the answers to those tech questions are like just-in-time translations of different module or API documentation. But yeah, I mean, it's just a resource that, you know, virtually everybody is engaged in, and their metrics really do back that up. And they can give us metrics on like how many active users that they have. And then we can look at like, is that number 12% of that 8 million number? And we've been able to do these correlations for years now. And the NPM number like has always just kind of tracked perfectly with kind of what we think that the user metrics are. So yeah, I'm much more confident in the number of users of Node.js metric than I think that I've seen. We have better data there than I think any other language has. I'll say that. Anyway, that's not really about this survey. But
yeah, I guess the reason I brought all that up is I'm skeptical a little bit of the data about how, like, because of the massive amount, what I assume is in the area of 50% of people who only use Node as a build tool, but still use Node.
Yeah.
Like, how does that skew this stuff? Like, if you take out, like, there aren't a ton of people doing like builds inside of containers compared to people running servers and containers, I imagine. But I mean, not that it's not done. I do it personally, but it's just more overhead for building a static asset. Like, what does the containers number go up to if you take out the build tool only people? I don't know. I just feel like because the two communities are there, it would be really much more interesting to see these data split on those 2 points.
So I did try to do this analysis once. Actually, there was a conference that you put together, I believe. Yeah. And for that,
ops conf.
Yes, exactly. And one of the things that I did in that talk was that I parsed through like GitHub data that figured out how many people are interacting with packages. And then I came up with like some fuzzy ways to figure out if it's a front end or a back end package.
This is what I was talking about whenever I made the joke like 10 minutes ago. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. It's not the greatest, but it was like kind of good enough. And what you saw was that front end packages had far more people engaging with them than back end packages, and that their growth was actually a lot higher. NPM, I think, I don't know if they're getting this from their download metrics or if they have a way of determining front end packages and then they can segment the users on the website, because that would give them a very good indication of how many people are only engaged in front end stuff. But I mean, they've said that they estimate that more than half, like a little over half of Node users are doing front end stuff. I don't think that they have like a great way to figure out if they're only doing front end stuff.
Sure.
Which I think is what you want. And
I mean,
that's
primarily
really
would be fine.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, as like, Node.js becomes a build tool for like anybody building a website, the web is definitely larger than people that write backends. Like, just period. Like, we know that. Yeah.
And there are a lot fewer options.
Yeah. So I'm getting so one of the slides in this deck is just a big, like a bunch of fucking logos, just like a ton of corporate logos for different companies. And at this point, like, can we just put up an empty slide that says people not using Node.js? Like, is that like just easier and more accurate?
Yeah, I'm always skeptical of those things too. Like I'm old school jQuery crew, but jQuery. It was amazing how many logos were the same across Dojo, MoveTools, and jQuery's websites. It's like, oh yeah, IBM uses jQuery. IBM uses Dojo. IBM never used MoveTools. Let's be fair. But it actually, like, I think I pushed at the time for jQuery to remove IBM's logo because they were very clearly a Dojo shop for the long. I mean, they had tons and tons of contributors to Dojo, and like their marketing sites use jQuery. So it was like, oh yeah, IBM uses jQuery, and I didn't really feel like that was fair. So I'm interested. It's like, does like the Skunkworks Labs team for people at X company use Node, or is like the API that company's known for built on Node? Because it's like, you could say Stripe uses Node for sure, but we don't have any like production services that I'm at least willing to mention here that use Node. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. No, and this was something that I had when I was at the foundation. I had to talk with analysts a lot about, because analysts heard for years about how enterprises are adopting Ruby, or and like what it always was like somebody's using a test framework somewhere written in Ruby.
Right.
And it wasn't like they were actually moving off of Java. And it took a while to convince them that like, no. Like, people are building production applications with all of their traffic in these enterprises running through Node. This is not just like a thing in their front end tool chain.
Right.
Although they definitely do have it in their front end tool chain somewhere. But I think outside of enterprise and outside of like tech analysts that care about enterprise, a much more interesting story to me is what's happening with front end development. Like, I think that this very huge shift in how we build front end applications and how much basically software infrastructure we're able to build up and evolve over time and continue to interdepend on, that being applied to kind of front end use cases and to like the broader web is just a much more interesting story to me than people building microservices that sit in front of their old ancient Java apps. Like, that's not very interesting to me. And so I know that there's like a lot of like weird identity politics about like Node.js is backend and whatever, like we're whatever framework is cool right now. But at the end of the day, like I think that one of the greatest successes for Node.js is going to be the change that happens in the front end web that is facilitated by the platform. So.
Sure.
One of the kind of interesting side effects of that is that it's also started to really dominate my time in Bash because, right? Because you have so many build tools that you're running from the command line that are just Node.js packages, but like I'm starting to have like a lot of commands showing up that people make, and it's an npm install. Mm-hmm. And that's how you get new. Right now, that's the main way I get new commands to use inside of my command line.
One benefit is that it's cross-platform.
Cross-platform,
yep.
Exactly.
I think that's really the main benefit. I mean, one is that like you have this dependency network that you can tap into, right? So you have all this software infrastructure. You don't have to build everything from scratch. But two, it's like
you don't have to write Bash.
You don't have to write Bash. Well, or I mean, like there's a lot of great things about Python, but like Python never had and still does not have a great cross-platform story. They're still pretty on Windows, and so is Ruby, and so is a lot of languages just never really did the work to be a first-class citizen the way that Node did, like in 2012.
Yeah.
Of course, Windows is trying to change that with their Unix stuff. And I don't know. I haven't tried that. Has anybody here tried that?
I have. It's not there yet.
Yeah.
So the problem is that like, as a subsystem, like if you treated it like a better VM or something, it's quite good. But as soon as you want to like use like a regular Windows thing and have it tap into that sub file system, like things go a little haywire. So anyway, like I think one thing, Alex, to point out is that like I think that this survey definitely picked up a section of the community that is more backend than what you would think of as the average, right? Like, look at like the number of respondents that work with databases directly. Like, that's really high. It's like 95%. Like, that's not like, yeah. And I mean, I think it's like the kind of people that wanted to spend 20 minutes filling out a Node.js survey just are going to be more likely to be backend people.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'd be in that 5%. I don't think I ever touch production databases, at least.
I try to write a database about every month from scratch, but I'm a weirdo.
What I would be interested to see is which databases people are using with Node.
There was data in the survey that was conducted the prior year on that. A lot of MongoDB still.
Yeah. Yes. They're $1 billion company now, right? I think they just hit it.
Yep.
Or 8 billion.
Full unicorn
it was something
status.
Insane.
It's full unicorn status. Yeah.
Yeah. What? I mean, for what it's worth, Stripe does not use Node. It does use MongoDB.
Well, not to store financial transactions.
Well, we store them there. We just store them a couple other places too. Just in case.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been hearing that Mongo's really ironed out a lot of those bugs at this point. I don't know if that's true. I haven't used them, but that's the story they're trying to get out there. Is that we had growing pains, but they made a lot of money. They got to be as big as they are, and then they put in the engineering effort necessary to stop losing data. Yeah. And if that's true, there you go.
The real thing was just like for the longest time, and maybe they've changed this, but like even after they added good transactional integrity and they could make those kinds of claims, it wasn't
they didn't put
default.
On default. Yeah.
Yeah. And like as soon as you enabled it, like MongoDB is pretty slow. And like one of the reasons why people gravitated towards it just for so long was because of these like claims that they made about how fast it was. Some of them were quite absurd though. Like I remember there was a blog post about how MongoDB is faster than Memcache for writes. And the reason is because Memcache has a response when you write. And the protocol for MongoDB didn't have a response for write. You just write it to the socket and you're like, I bet it's stored. And so basically what this metric was testing is how fast can you write
messages
to a socket?
UDP versus TCP.
The UDP of databases.
We Stripe had backed him for a little bit to do work on this, and for the most part, he's done it on his own note. Kyle Kingsbury, better known as Aphyr, APHYR, has a tool called Jepsen, and Jepsen tests this type of stuff on databases. And he has a series called Call Me Maybe. So if you search for Aphyr, Call Me Maybe, there's some really good stuff on on how good like Mongo is with what settings. And so essentially, like, in order to make Mongo safe, you have to put it on the absolute most max settings, even though 3 down is called like guaranteed safe or, you know, something. So it's like you have to go 2 past guarantee safe to get guaranteed safe. But I will, I don't know how much is public or not, so I shouldn't say too much, but Stripe has been on MongoDB for a long time. And because we have a lot of dependencies there, we're slower to upgrade than you know, someone who's using it as a pet project. And I think we've seen a lot of great performance improvements, even on like point release updates to Mongo, and that's been encouraging at least. But you know, every few years we're like, should we keep this? And generally it's like the benefits it gives are good enough, and we're good enough at keeping it up, and we run enough you know, game days to know that when it goes down we can fix it. In 3.2 they swapped out the underlying like subsystem for something or other, and I think that made a huge difference.
This episode is brought to you by TopTal, a global network of top freelance software developers, designers, and finance experts. If you're looking for contract or freelance opportunities, apply to join TopTal to work with top clients like Airbnb, Artsy, Zendesk, and more. When you join TopTal, you'll be part of a global community of developers who have the freedom and flexibility to live where they want, travel, attend TopTal events all over the world, and more. And on the flip side, if you're looking to hire developers, designers, or finance experts, TopTal makes it super easy to find qualified talent to join your team. Head to TopTal.com, that's TOPTAL.com, and tell them Adam from the Changelog sent you. And by Sentry. Sentry is an open source error tracking application that shows you every crash in your stack as it happens. It gives you details to prioritize, identify, reproduce, and fix each issue. They also give you information to support your team, so you can use that information to reach out to those affected. Head to changelog.com/sentry. Start tracking your errors today for free. Get off the ground with their free plan. Once again, changelog.com/sentry. Tell them we sent you, and now back to the show.
All right, so now we're going to dive into the Beaker Browser. Paul, why don't you give us some history here? I know that you've been working on this for quite a while now. Give us some history of kind of why you started the project, what the mission is, and then we'll get into some of the more recent developments.
All right, cool. So we started Beaker about a year and a month. They actually got started at a decentralized web summit. Now, like right before that, I had spent about 2 years working on Secure Scuttlebutt with Dominic Tarr. And Secure Scuttlebutt was it actually still is, it's a purely peer-to-peer social network. And so Dominic had come up with this really cool kind of cryptographic network for exchanging different feeds of JSON, basically. And the technology kind of feels like, you know, it's these logs of data, so it's almost like a Twitter, right? Everybody has their own feed and they publish these JSON blobs. So we took that and we said, okay, we could make a little peer-to-peer social network on that and, you know, see what happens. So we got that to work and got a little community going, and it was really cool and definitely a great learning experience. But around the time, you know, about a year ago, I was getting to the point where I had really one of the big goals I had was how could we make it so other people could build on that tech, right? Because the peer-to-peer stuff is really, really cool, but it's also like, yeah, if we have a peer-to-peer app, but it's not like part of a platform, and it doesn't really change the situation that much. Like we want to be able to have something like not just a peer-to-peer Twitter, but also a peer-to-peer email and a peer-to-peer Reddit and a peer-to-peer whatever, right? You want to get away entirely from the services model if you're interested in decentralization. So the stuff we had done with Secure Scuttlebutt was really cool, but it was hard for other developers to hook into the stack and start making their own apps. So I walked away from that and was thinking, okay, well, we have Electron now. And Electron is a really nice wrapper around Chromium. And so it would be nice if we could just take that and just go ahead and build an entirely new browser off of it, and then take some of these new protocols that people are working on. I got a yowling cat out here. Take some of the protocols that people are working on and just add them into the browser, make them new native web platform tech. And you know what? I got to get this cat. Give me a second.
All right. That was hilarious.
If only Rachel could be here.
Yep.
So, right. So we took so that was the idea. And when I started on it, I decided I'm going to branch out from just SSV, just secure scuttlebutt. I'll take a look at some of the other protocols that were being worked on. And the Decentralized Web Summit was really good timing because it was a bunch of different protocol teams getting together to talk about what they were doing. So IPFS was there, the DAT project was there. I remember Media Chain, a couple of different blockchain-based things. Zuko was there with Zcash. So I talked to a lot of people, started to try to gauge interest for this idea, like, hey, what if we had a browser we could throw all these things into? And so that's how it got started. And it took maybe like 6 months to get a browser UI on top of Electron, like get all the basics working. And then I integrated IPFS and DAT. And then over time, I took IPFS out and focused on DAT and kept on packaging it and fixing it up. And now we have Beaker.
Awesome. So you mentioned that there's like a bunch of different protocols that people are experimenting with right now.
Yeah.
Which ones have you kind of gone down the rabbit hole of supporting, and which ones have you kind of solidified at this point?
So the three I could speak most authoritatively on would be DAT, Secure Scuttlebutt, and IPFS. DAT and IPFS are basically variations on BitTorrent. They're real similar, and they're both really solid technologies. And then, I know about the different blockchains at least like at an arm's distance. I could tell you how they work. But I haven't gone too deep into them. I'm kind of waiting for the blockchain space to stabilize a little bit and maybe get away from proof of work. I'm not a huge fan of proof of work. But pretty much the two that I think are the most interesting right now are DAT and IPFS.
And do you support both of those protocols right now?
No, not at the moment. Yeah, this is an interesting thing, and actually, we're really open to hearing from other people about this. DAT and IPFS are really similar, They both use the same mental model from BitTorrent, which is this idea that you have crypto addresses, so either like a hash of the content or a public key, and that is now like the basis of your URLs. And then you share some files on this network, and other people that download from you can then rehost for you, right? So as you have more peers in the network, there are more hosts for a piece of content. And so that the network sort of automatically scales up to make sure that any file that gets popular you can find it quickly and nobody's having to give away a whole lot of bandwidth. So they're so similar that for a while we supported both, but at one point we kind of stopped and said, how do we communicate to users which one they ought to use, right? Because maybe the biggest difference between them is that IPFS is really narrowly focused, or mainly focused, I'll say, on static pieces of content that are addressed by content hashes. I think they maybe tend to use a SHA-3. Don't quote me on that. And then DAT tends to focus much more on archives of data that change over time. And so those are addressed by public keys. Now this, just saying that probably puts three or four people to sleep. So I don't know how we would say it inside the browser that's like, oh yeah, well obviously I want to use IPFS for this particular case. So we ended up dropping it because we just didn't really understand how we'd be getting a lot of benefit to users other than the fact that you might be able to browse, two protocols and maybe the content that you want is on IPFS and not DAT. So we're relatively happy with it right now. It's let us stay really focused, and we're just going to keep on, we'll stay light on our feet. If IPFS ends up blowing up, we'll get it in there.
It's almost like, you're just waiting for somebody to send a pull request.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, that's really interesting. So you said that DAT is very good at data that changes over time. So like I'm a regular web developer. I want to shove my application into DAT and host it on this network? Like, what does that workflow look like right now?
Well, it's kind of like a from the perspective of using the software, it feels a little bit like using Git, feels a little bit like using NPM. You have this area that's like your local staging area, so you can work on your website, and your website's just a folder on your computer somewhere. So you'll be working on it and making these local changes to it, and that's the staging area there, and you can open it up in the browser and work on it. And then once you're happy with it, you hit the publish button, and that's pretty much the whole story. At that point, your browser is going to, in the background, make the changes available to the swarm, and anybody that's subscribed to that swarm, which happens if they visit your site, they'll pull down the updates you made. And so the point that we're trying to hit is that it feels just like using tools that we're already super familiar with. And so the peer-to-peer network, by and large, is hidden from you. And if it's working really well, it should feel pretty magical.
So how similar would you say this is to season 5 of Silicon Valley?
Some pretty bad stuff goes down inside season 5, so I'm going to say 99% same thing. We're had to cover up a lot of scandals while we're working on this thing.
Got it. I mean, that's the new internet, right? That's what the current whatever. Anyways, I guess we talked a little bit about like the what, like how, and the how. But can, in your like least tinfoil hat way, explain why someone would be interested in using this?
Oh yeah. I think actually you got to throw away the tinfoil hat, right? Because the tinfoil hat version would be it's censorship resistant, so the government can't take you down, or the other one would be that it's. There's some interesting things to be said about that. But the main reason that you take these texts and you put them into the browser is that you want to make it do new cool things. So for Beaker, with these peer-to-peer texts, like you can create a website off of your computer, and it's just a button inside the browser. You just hit make me a new website, and it's going to allocate a new domain for you, and then you can immediately share the link with somebody, and you're done. You've created a whole new website. And that principle ends up actually being really interesting because it's so easy to make a website like that, it's actually even exposes some web APIs. And so an application that you're using on your computer can actually then use the peer-to-peer network to publish files or to consume files or anything like that. And that's how you set the start of a stack for building applications that don't need services at all. You're just having these totally peer-to-peer applications, and now you can have better personal privacy because you're exchanging files directly from one computer to another. And you can do some cool open source stuff because whenever you're using the application, all of the source code goes down onto your computer, right? You go to a DAT website, there's no service somewhere that you're having to talk to. You got all of the source code, so you can actually fork that website and create a whole copy of it that you control, and you can just start modifying it right away. So the privacy story is really good, but so is the sort of open source, open architecture story. And if we can really flush out that entire stack, we can get to the point where you don't have to use these databases that are on somebody's server somewhere, what you could call a data silo, right? It's somebody else's computer. Now you're just publishing content by writing it to your computer, and you control the keys that say that you're the author. And then other people get the files off of you, and now you're just totally in control of your presence on the web.
Okay. What I'm trying to. That was a really good sentence. If I am malicious, let's talk about that. So how many people do I have to pretend to be before I control your content maliciously or something? Like, is there a quorum type situation? Am I GPG signing everything I write so it's authenticated? And like, what does that whole security system work like? Because if there are, enough malicious people and a small enough site, it seems like they could kind of change all the content of that person's website since they're sharing the bulk of it.
Yeah, no, the key there is that there's no number of people that would start to do that. It's not like there's a Sybil attack or anything that you could do to take over somebody's website. The way it works is that each website in the DAT network has a key pair, and the public key acts as the address of it. So instead of an IP address, you use a public key address. And then there's a private key. And that private key is controlled by whoever generated the site. And they keep that private key protected. And so anytime that they change the site, they sign the update that they push out into the network. And so anybody that's looking for a website and want to make sure that it's an authentic piece of content from that website, they check the signature on that content against the address of the site they're trying to look up.
So the key is that, the key is about the prime thing to know there is that the address is the public key, which means that you can't spoof a different private key. I mean, you could make a totally different website. So how recognizable are so if the website is just a public key, what stops me from saying, oh, here, go to Paul's website, and it's just my website that is an exact copy of yours, but now it's my public key? Is there SSL certs? Is there EV? Is there any, how do we kind of manage the whole identity situations? Is it ring of trust or that type of stuff?
That's an interesting question, because we actually could start to get into ring of trust, flow of trust ideas at some point. What we've done at the moment is, first of all, just to answer the very basic of your question, the public keys are 64 characters long. They're hex string, so that you're never going to be able to look at it and say, yeah, that's the right address.
Yeah, right.
I would argue that that's probably usually been the case also for IP addresses too. Similar story. You never would send out your
which
website
is why DNS is so important with SSL certs, right?
Right. So we don't have anything quite like SSL certs yet, because that's a whole big social enterprise to have SSL certs exist. Right. And so what we've done is we do have a DNS solution, and it's kind of a hack. It's we basically host. How to describe this? Well, we have on we make you run an HTTPS server. So if I have beakerbrowser.com, you have to run an HTTPS server. And then under a .well-known folder, you put a file titled dat. And this file has the key, the kind of the raw URL for the dat that you want to have at that address. And so what happens is, whenever I try to type into my browser dat://beakerbrowser.com, what Beaker will do is it'll contact HTTPS beakerbrowser.com, and it'll look for that .wellknown/dat file. And if it's there and a valid dat URL comes in the content of that file, it'll then go ahead and say, okay, that's the dat address you're trying to look up.
I see. So it kind of piggybacks off of the centralized system just as a kind of verification system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but,
because
makes sense.
Yeah. It gives us the security we need. It's relatively easy to deploy. We thought about doing something with DNSSEC, but DNSSEC doesn't really have the adoption or the confidence in the community that I think really would make that a good long-term solution. And you can only use DNSSEC with 3 top-level domains. There's not a whole lot of adoption out there, so we decided that this would be a good compromise.
That's cool. That's a tough problem to solve. Are there so what is the premise? Do you do this full time as a business and you sell it off? Did you get a grant? Do you just have a bunch of money from the lottery and you're working for fun?
No lottery yet. We actually, let me break that up into 2 answers. The first, there's Code for Science is the team that's actually building the DAT protocol. They are a nonprofit. They're grant funded.
That's Max still, or
that's Max Ogden. Yeah, runs that. And then Matthias Booz is the lead protocol engineer, and you'll know him on the web as Macintosh. Macintosh, but with an F in there. And they I think it's the Knight Foundation, the Sloan Foundation, and maybe others that have funded them. And
the Arthur P. Sloan Foundation. I don't know if that's the same one. I just listen to a lot of NPR. Or
a lot of NPR. Right?
This week we're on NPR instead of the Changelog Network.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I don't know if it's the same one, but Yeah, so they're a nonprofit.
It is.
They're specifically okay, cool. They're specifically focused on helping out, I would say, governments and academics, scientists, and things like that. Help them with data archiving. That's the mission for the Code for Science and the mission for the DAP protocol. And so we showed up with the Beaker project and really liked what they had done with the protocol and liked working with them. And so we went ahead and said, okay, well, we're going to apply this into this browser as well. And so we're a separate group making the Beaker browser, and we're Blue Link Labs is our company. We're a for-profit, and we're bootstrapped so far. It's myself and co-founder Tara Vansel, and we are planning. Well, we have basically what we've done to try to fund ourselves is put together a public super peer. This is a website called Hashbase. You can find it on hashbase.io. And the idea with this is that this is a peer-to-peer network, and it does really great with your content if you're popular. But if you don't have anybody that's subscribing to what you've done, if you turn off your computer, you're not going to be able to seed the files for it. So you need to have somebody on the network that you can trust to actually keep your content online. And so the super peer, the Hashbase, it's basically a peer up in the cloud that you can push the files to, and then you can comfortably turn your computer off and know that other people will still be able to find it. And
so it's kind of like a centralization of.
Yeah, it's an
unfortunate side effect, but I don't think it's a bad idea. It's a great idea. I think the decentralized thing is important, not as a default thing, but not as necessarily like a constant. And so, especially with content that goes off. So I'm just
that's
great. Yeah.
That I do actually agree with your point there that decentralization is the default is the good starting point. We actually have two answers for you on that, because I think there is a fair point there, and that's centralizing it again. And first of all, we call Hashbase as a fungible service. Fungible, like you can completely replace it at any point, and we think that's actually really important for this whole idea. It's kind of like similar to a federation, with the idea that one of the services that does it is just as good as one of the others for the most part. So Hashbase, it's open source, and we'll probably make variations that are totally compatible with it, that are easier to self-deploy. And yeah, it is a service that is being run by somebody else, but you could easily jump off of our version of it and onto some other public peer service, some other super peer service, and nobody would even know, because what this service is offering you is totally in the background. There's no data silo on this thing. It's just a little, utility that kind of handles work for you, hidden in the background. So we think that's actually really important, because so much of what we're doing is geared toward decentralization, and so we want to make sure that people understand that. The other answer that I have about the centralization aspect is that, for my money, I think probably where this all leads to is people being able to run servers at home, like a little box, a piece of hardware that you can plug in and just forget about, but it'll keep your content online in the same way that a public super peer would, and then you have just a much better privacy story. You could have one of these home pieces of hardware sitting there doing a search query for you, and nobody would have to. You wouldn't have to talk to Google for it. So that's the sort of thing that's going to take some time, because you actually have to get the software put in the right place, and the hardware has to be built, or at least you have to find a good desktop somewhere. But
and everyone puts it behind their 10-year-old Linksys router. Exactly.
Right. And then ideally they just forget about it, just because you don't have to keep it up to date or anything.
Awesome. So this has been great. I think we got to start wrapping up the show now. So we're going to get into picks. Everybody have personal picks that they brought. Why don't we start with you, Alex?
This week I'm going to go with another internationalization pick. I think I started the season off with an internationalization pick, but Globalize.js is a collection of tools for number formatting and message formatting and currency and all that kind of stuff. More importantly, though, it does parsing, which is one of the harder things to do. So, like, I'm typing in numbers that have commas as decimal points, and then trying to turn that into a number in JavaScript is a much harder thing than rendering, like formatting something with, moment.js or something like that. The same is true of dates. It can parse dates in a similar way. And that's really difficult. And so that's been a lifesaver for me in my real job this week and lately. So it's completely backed off of this CLDR, which is the Unicode Common Locale Data Repository. And that's where they keep like the standard set of all the locale information. And so it's good. It's great. It's what Twitter uses to localize their website, if that's helpful. So it's actually a JavaScript Foundation project, previously the jQuery Foundation. And interestingly enough, the message format implementation inside of it is mine that I wrote. But at Stripe, we don't use that one. We pulled in a different one before we added globalized, and so we don't use my library. So it doesn't count. All right, that's my pick.
All right, Paul, you have a pick for us today?
Does this have to be a module? Can it be a service? What are the rules?
It can be anything. It can be a book. It can be a passion. It doesn't even have to be in tech.
It can be powder oil powder.
Man, you know what? Give me a second. Can you do yours first, and I'll think of something for you? Sure.
So mine actually is in tech this time, so I'm not just gonna throw out non-tech things. It's called Semantic Release. So I've just been kind of feeling the weight of maintaining a lot of modules that people use. And as I've been writing new code and new modules, I've been thinking about ways that I can, automate things a bit more up front and do some work up front to make the longer term maintenance of it a lot easier. One thing that I've been using is this tool called Semantic Release. Basically, if you use commit as n and do like these proper kind of commit messages, denoting features or fixes and stuff like that, Semantic Release will just automate the releases entirely. So the pushes to NPM and everything will just happen automatically. So this is like really great when you combine it with a couple other tools. So I have for these new modules that I'm writing, I have like 100% test coverage, and I point coveralls at it. I'm using this cool tool called commit as n. So there's actually like an npm command to write proper commit messages. That using Husky, which is like a way to install Git hooks into a project when you're messing around with it locally. So you can kind of verify all of this stuff and give people a really easy path to contribute. And then as I'm pulling in patches, I can tell if it's completely tested. And as soon as it lands with these proper commit messages, like just the entire release process is automated. It's really hard to get to this kind of level of like nice tooling and automation in existing projects. So it's not going to help me out with requests anytime soon, but I'm really loving it for my new projects. So check out Semantic Release on GitHub. Paul?
Well, I don't think I got a pick for you, but I will say I am enjoying watching Game of Thrones last season. So I'll if you haven't heard about it, it's a little show on HBO. It's real fun. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, I had not heard of it.
Yeah. Can you spell that?
Some guy, George R.R. I don't know. Is it Martinez? I think you're right. Yeah, look it up. It's pretty cool.
I think it's Dinklage.
Oh yeah.
No. All right, and that's our show. Thanks for everybody on the live stream and everybody listening at home. Thank you. Bye.
All right, thank you for tuning in to JS Party this week. Thanks also to our sponsors, TopTal, Sentry, and Hired. Also, thanks to Fastly, our bandwidth partner. Head to fastly.com to learn more. We host everything we do on Linode servers. Head to linode.com/changelog. Check them out, support the show. This show is produced by myself, Adam Stakoviak, and edited by Jonathan Youngblood. And the awesome music you've been hearing is produced by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. We do this show live every Friday at 3 p.m. U.S. Eastern, noon Pacific. So join us at changelog.com/live. Slack with us in real time. Head to changelog.com/community. We'll see you again next week. Thanks for listening.